Hi everybody, I'm Steve Scott, and I'm here with my wife Becky Scott on the right and AnnMaria DeMars on the left, who have been friends for now 41 years, you guys. And Ann's...
You're old. I brushed my hair for this. I want that on camera.
And I put on makeup.
There we go, okay.
That makes this a real high budget event.
And if you're wondering why we're doing this, you are looking at, on the left, AnnMaria was the first American to win a World Judo Championship in 1984, Vienna, Austria. And Becky on the right was the first American woman, that's in the sport of judo. And on the right, Becky was the first American woman to win a World Championship in the sport of Sambo. Greg Gibson had won the world title in 1980 in Paris, but Becky won her title in 1983 in Madrid. Both were Pan American Games champions, Ann winning the Pan American Games in judo, and Becky winning her Pan American Games gold medal in Sambo. So we have two people who have been in judo, in women's judo. That's going to be the subject of this talk, really, this discussion, since the early days. A historical fact, the first national women's judo tournament ever held in the United States was in October of 1973 in Racine, Wisconsin. That's where these two ladies met each other. And so here we are in 2014, so that's a few years ago. And they have been part of the history of women's judo at some degree or another ever since. A lot of you may know AnnMaria as the mother of Ronda Rousey, but she actually had another life before she had Ronda. And those of us who've known AnnMaria for some time know that she is and was a world-class athlete in certainly her own right. So, ladies, again, really, Ann's staying here with us for a couple of days to visit in Kansas City. She lives in the Los Angeles area. But let's start this real quickly. You guys met in 1973. I was there when you met at that tournament. Judo's changed a lot in the years. What did you have to go through in those early years when women really weren't encouraged to do judo at all in the United States? What was it like for you those early years? To tell, just tell everybody.
I think weren't encouraged is a gross understatement. Certainly, there were clubs where I was told, one year, and some of the communities that I thought I was just very that I would go to class with people like when I would go out and find a tournament, the tournament was the easiest thing I did all year.
There was a real lack of women competitors too. Most of the time we didn't have very many women to train with. We trained with the guys.
Right.
And sometimes you just had to take, you often said we fought anybody that showed up in a judo gi.
In a white t-shirt,
Right.
had a white t-shirt and a judo gi,
and
yeah.
I think that's very appropriate. I remember back then we had to qualify, through the Missouri Valley Championships, and then you went to your regional and all that. And I remember one Missouri Valley Championship, I was told you can't do arm bars. Women aren't allowed to do arm bars. And I'm like, really? Not that juji was my specialty, but I certainly could pull off my own share of them. And I said, that's okay. I don't need an arm bar to beat them. I can throw them or pin them or choke them instead. So we'll just leave it at that.
And that's exactly what you did. You threw everybody from that tournament for Ippon, because I was there and I saw that, and it irritated more than one person, But in those early years, as far as your training, you didn't have a lot of support. You didn't have a lot of financial support, certainly.
That make that no financial
no financial support, none. Yeah.
1 year, I will tell you, at the peak of our career, Steve and I are obviously married. So at the peak of our career, I worked at Hallmark Cards. I think I made all of about, $8,000 a year. You were working at the community center, not making that much more. And I remember thinking we made $16,000, the two of us that year. We spent $8,000 of that on our travel.
Right.
just for all the different judo tournaments. And you know, you didn't have any support. You paid it. You paid for all of it yourself.
That's exactly right. You know, and I can remember, AnnMaria, when you would come up after you and Becky met in '73. I think it was about '74. I can't remember. Anyway, Becky and I got married in '75, and you would come up and visit those years afterwards and stay in our spare bedroom. And this, by the way, the very house we're still in. I'm still in it because I'm cheap. Becky's wanted to move several times, but being the cheap guy that I am, we're still here. But nonetheless, AnnMaria would come and stay. And you traveled. You were living in the St. Louis area at the time as a young girl. You traveled extensively just to find gyms and dojos to train in. Where did you travel in those years? What was it like for you?
Well, see, that was the funny thing about having no money, and again, being something that you thought was a disadvantage turning out well, because I would hitchhike to Chicago, which was 300 miles, and stay with some distant relative or stay with some friend from college, because I went to college at 16, so I would stay with somebody and then train at Uptown Dojo, train somewhere every night. And if you and I would hitchhike out here, which is about 200 and some miles. So if you, and it takes a while to hitchhike across the state. So if it took you 6 hours to get somewhere, you weren't going to just work out for an hour and a half and go home. So I would end up spending the weekend. We'd work out, you know, a couple hours in the morning, take a break, work up a couple hours in the afternoon. So we basically had our own sort of ad hoc training camps, which I don't think people train like that now. When I talk to kids in LA about, well, let's train for 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, they act like I'm insane. But if you'd had to hitchhike 6 hours across the state, you weren't going to just work out for an hour and a half.
Well, I can remember when you would come up, and then later when you and Dave got married, Dave Burns, and you drive down. You were living up in Minnesota at that time, and then you wouldn't hitchhike. You'd actually drive down here, but you would stay, you know, here and train with us, and we would you get here on a Friday late afternoon, early evening. We'd spend all day Saturday training basically at the community center. You'd spend part of this morning Sunday, and you guys would drive back Sunday afternoon back to Minnesota. And you're right. We basically would just show up, and there'd be 4 or 5 guys in the club who'd be willing to train with you and Dave and Becky and me and some other people. And it would be just good, hard training all day, and we'd drill. You guys trained an awful lot together in those days. You were good training partners. You were also rivals. You fought each other from time to time. Becky was in a heavier weight class than you were. You both were very successful in judo, and Becky went on to specialize a little more in Sambo. But I'd like to tell a story very quickly. I tried to get you, Ann, on the Pan American team in 1983 when women were first allowed to do Sambo at the Pan American Games, and you were going to do, you had already made the judo team. And the governing body of judo at the time, U.S. Judo Incorporated, now USA Judo, did not want you to compete. I remember I lobbied to get you on that Sambo team, but you would have been a double gold medalist both in judo and Sambo, and you wanted to do that too, I know. But they didn't want you to get hurt. I think the Sambo was contested first before the judo, and they didn't want a chance of you getting injured or anything. Not that you would have got hurt at any point, I guarantee that. But that brings up a point where there's a great story about you and Natasha Hernandez in the Pan American Games, which I think is a classic story. And you basically made sure that she didn't fight you the following year at the Worlds. Can you tell us a little bit about that and your version of what went on? I thought it was a fabulous story, personally.
Well, Natasha Hernandez was a really good judo player.
World class. She was fabulous.
She was growing. She was 17, so she was kind of on the edge of going into the higher weight division, staying the one she was at. And I wanted to convince her that it would be a good idea to move up in weight. And that's the thing that I always talk about when I was younger kids, because we were old. I mean, I was 25 by this time. But there's a big difference between a 25-year-old woman and a 17-year-old. And I was willing to break her arm in half. And my determination when I went out there is I wanted to break her arm.
And you told me you were going to break her arm. So she had to move up.
Right. Well, like I said, I wanted to break her arm. Because I figured if you're already having trouble making the weight and somebody breaks your arm, then you might think, it's really not worth cutting those extra 8 pounds.
That's right.
And she did. She moved up after that, and she went on to win the Worlds at the Division above me.
Yeah, you beat her in the Pan Am Games.
Yes.
At what weight class was that? 123?
123.
And then the next year at the Worlds, she fought at 134.
Yep.
And she won it, and you won the Worlds at 123. Yep. So that's the kind of class of opposition that she was. She was a world-class athlete. And but you convinced her quite well that she should move up the next year and not ever fight you again, which I thought was a wonderful story, actually.
Diane Pierce, when I was very young, and I'm still mad because she beat me in the finals of the U.S. Open when I was
Well, she beat
17.
me too. Don't feel bad.
Diane Pierce, by the way, was everyone was one of the greatest judo players, seriously, in the United States. She's not well known because I really think that there may have been a little fact that a little sexism there, that she was a woman.
You think?
I think, and she was one of the best judo players ever to put on a gi in this country.
She
And
was.
both of you ladies fought her several times each. And well, go ahead. I'm sorry with your story.
I only fought her once. I
Only-
fought her
well,
at
I know Becky
17.
fought her several
I was
times.
17. I fought her in the finals of the U.S. Open, and she beat me. And she was very kind, actually, because, you know, she was older and she knew she was verging on retirement. And my coach said, go up and ask her for some advice. And I did. And later on, in fact, she taught me that armbar that she armbarred me with. So.
Really a pioneer in a lot of different ways because, you know, back then, girls were not supposed to wear like the solid black belts. They had to wear a white stripe on their belt to delineate that it's a kata belt or that you're a woman.
A woman's rank, yeah, as it were.
A woman's rank. And I never will forget that Diane fought, I can't remember.
Well, that was 73 in Racine.
73 in Racine. She fought in that white striped belt, but as soon as
No, she did. She fought in a white belt.
I
A white
remember
belt,
that.
that's right. It was a white belt. And then when she got up on the podium, before they gave her a medal, she ripped off that white belt, pulled her black belt out of her gi, tied it on.
Which was a solid black
a
belt.
solid black belt, tied it on, pulled it, and then just stood there proudly and got her
I
medal.
remember, I was 15 years old, and I thought, I want to be her when I
That's
grow up.
exactly
That's exactly
what I
right.
thought, too.
And by the way, everybody in that crowd, male and female, gave her like a standing O.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
they knew what she was doing, and really, you women back in '73, you were that YMCA Nationals, Racine, Wisconsin, was the first year you were allowed to compete in randori type competition.
Exactly.
Prior to that, it was all kata, and after that, you know, women went on. The USJA did much to develop women's judo, and after that, the AAU finally, when it was the governing body, hooked up to it, and it became a viable sport. And now we, really looking back, we have women who are. I think the women have been more successful than our men overall internationally.
You know, when the women
In
first
judo.
started into international competition, I mean, there were some people who were just amazingly good. I mean, we went over to the U.S. or the British Open, and you know, they all traveled over there on their own. And I mean, Diane Pierce, Bonnie Corte from St. Louis, your neck of the woods. You know,
Well,
Maureen Brazil.
Maureen Brazil. I mean, there were a lot of women who paid their own way and went over there, were outstanding in international competition before U.S. Judo or the then governing body AAU ever did anything to help women's judo.
Yeah, you guys were pioneers. You were two of the first women actually in the United States to be very successful at the sport of judo. And then when we got women into sambo, and I'm very proud to say that I was the guy that stuck his neck out and got women into sambo in the United States. The first women's nationals we had here in Kansas City, you both won that in your weight classes, and then frankly we enjoyed sambo a lot, and AnnMaria, her career was really going well in judo, and then Becky and I really pushed off into the sambo quite a bit, and that helped her internationally. It was part of her career, you know, made her very, very good athlete. But I think it's very rare. Both of you were national champions, both in judo and sambo. And women, you don't see that too much anymore. You just don't see that crossover like it used to be. Basically, you ladies fought anybody in a jacket, and you beat them pretty much.
You had to. There weren't that many women that were doing judo at the time.
But there were the women that were. There was some really high quality of competition.
Yeah.
You guys had some great competitors you fought. That first year in 1980 was the real major turning point in women's judo, and I think February of 1980 was the first women's national training camp in Colorado Springs. You guys were both invited. I was there as a young man, as a coach, And of course, Becky, your sister Jan Trussell was there too. You guys were there at the Olympic Training Center. The facilities weren't great at the time. They were good for what we had at the time, not anything like they are now. But it was kind of an exciting time to be in judo then. That first year of training, I think we had literally almost all the best women judo players in the United States.
I just remember being excited to actually be able to work out with other women, not
Right.
just all men or boys. That's what was exciting about me, you know, for me.
Right, right. And so how was that, you know, that type of being, at the time, did you realize you were kind of making history? Or
No.
looking back,
I was an angry little person back then, even more so than now. It's hard to believe. And I was actually quite disgusted because I was pretty clear that the reason they had women there is the U.S. Olympic Training Center was being underutilized. They thought, let's bring in some women. And they had men coaching who had wanted to be the men's coaches, but they took the women as, you know, well, I'll settle for this. And so I was not very, I was very happy, like I was very happy with the women that I had to train with.
Right.
But the coaches who thought they were settling, that thought that, I was not very happy with some of the coaches. I was not very happy with anybody who thought that I was a second-class citizen and I didn't have any use for any of them, and I was willing to get on the mat and try and beat up anybody, anytime, anywhere, coach, male, female, and some of the competitors were great, and some of them were not, they had different attitudes.
Yeah.
I mean, there were people I would go up and kick them that were sitting by the side of the wall and say, come on out and fight. Because there were people who went to the nice clubs where women were supposed to behave and wore the little white stripes on their belt. And I'm proud to say I have never worn a black belt with a white stripe on it. Because I was told that's to signify that a woman's black belt isn't as good as a man's. And I said, I will never put one on unless
I
somebody
never
can make
wore one
me.
either.
And I have
Yeah.
yet to. And so I would go and these other people, well, you're so mean, or why do we have to do mat work? And so I was, yeah, sort of the evil little person at camp, just like always.
we're going to call it for now. We're going to come in part 2 because we're really running over time for YouTube. So we're going to come back on a part 2 on this. Hold on, please.